Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few, US Pie's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers. In each episode, Sherry delivers the latest news from the front lines of the fight for the minds of the next generation, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few, and I have another great show for you today. Joining me today is Julie Barrett, founder of Conservative Ladies of America, an organization that champions parental rights, traditional values, and liberty-minded policies through advocacy, education, and civic action. Julie and I are going to discuss Colorado's controversial new law, HB 1312, known as the Kelly Loving Act, the transgender movement's most recent attack on the family. Before I bring her on, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to visit uspie.org to learn more and join the movement.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. U.S. Pie's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at US Pie on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few. Joining me today is Julie Barrett, founder of Conservative Ladies of America. Julie is a fearless advocate for children, families, and faith-based values, standing boldly against the radical ideologies infiltrating our government and educational system. She combines her political passion with a professional background in digital marketing and communications to lead one of the nation's most dynamic grassroots movements. Julie Barrett, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sherry. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you today.
Well, I'm so glad you could make it. So we're just going to start with you telling us a little bit about your organization, Conservative Ladies of America. So what would you say is your overall focus, and how did you get started?
Well, we actually got started in Washington State, which, as you probably know, is a deep blue state. Very small population of conservatives. Well, you would think that. But when I started Conservative Ladies of Washington back in 2020, we were in COVID and there were a lot of lockdowns in Washington. And then we had the Chaz and Chop and the Summer of Love in Seattle, and hundreds and thousands, literally thousands of conservative ladies started coming into what was then just a Facebook group. And in 2021, we formed an official organization. And 3 weeks after we launched, my daughter, who was 14 at the time, had been in a mental health crisis at Seattle Children's Hospital, and was then sent without my consent to a homeless shelter upon her discharge. And it was at that time that I came face to face with Washington's very anti-family laws. That's a very long story and for another day, but that situation got me connected with legislators in Washington State who had reached out to me about wanting to help with our situation. And I quickly became, I would say, maybe a little bit obsessed with going down the rabbit hole on legislation and wanting to find out how we got here, and really realized how few just common sense citizens were engaged in the legislative process. And so that became the mission of the organization, was to educate citizens and encourage and equip them to become active in their government, whether at a local level, a state level, and now even at a federal level. So we launched Conservative Ladies of America in 2023, and I no longer reside in Washington. I'm now in Florida. And so we're really trying to reach citizens all across the country, about the policy that we're going to be talking about today, the Kelly Loving Act in Colorado. These are things that a lot of times citizens don't know about until after the fact, until it's too late, and they find themselves in a situation similar to what we were in, where it was too late. And so we're trying to get people ahead of the curve and really get common sense citizens and especially parent advocates into the fight so that we can start protecting our children and protecting our families.
Wow, what a horrific story. I mean, you just spoke briefly about what happened with your daughter and what motivated your activism. Um, I'm just curious, and this, of course, isn't what we plan to discuss, but do you want to just tell us briefly a little more about that?
Sure. So she was in that homeless shelter for a total of 10 days. And shortly after she got there, we realized that we were dealing with activist social workers and activists that were working in the youth shelter. I became connected to a radio host, a conservative radio host in Seattle. His name is Todd Herman. He did some interviews with me as this whole thing was going on. It we actually had to have the help of 8 Seattle police officers to get her out of this youth shelter. They were holding her hostage. And it was like a 8 hour standoff to actually get her out. And then we had her back in the hospital because she was kind of still in crisis. And we needed to stabilize her. And we were trying to have her transferred out of state to Idaho because by this time I'd realized that the laws in Washington state did not allow me to be making medical and mental health decisions for my minor child. And so we had to actually wrestle with Seattle Children's Hospital to get her transferred out of Washington into Idaho. And then she actually spent a total of 22 months outside of the state of Washington to get some mental health care. And during that, between 2021 and when we actually moved 2 years ago, it was just one thing after another with the state of Washington and these anti-parent laws. That particular daughter has a twin. They're girls, and her sister was socially transitioned at her high school. Kind of after we got the one child out of state, we've got the other child who's being socially transitioned by her school. So it was almost like I was coming up against almost every scenario you could think of for the government to interfere with your family. And I think I was testifying a lot in the Washington state legislature, during that time. And I think for me, that was kind of a way to keep me occupied and have me focused on something that was hopefully having a positive outcome, and really educating other parents about what was going on. Otherwise, I think I would have been a total basket case. Because it really is very difficult for parents who have a child in crisis in a state like Washington, and Colorado and California, and a lot of these blue states are very similar in nature.
Wow, I'm so appreciative of you sharing that very personal story about your children. But that's the thing. It's one of the main things is the focus of this podcast is trying to expose to America what's happening to our children. And so it is dreadful. I'm so sorry you experienced that. And I pray that your children are doing better today. And I know it's probably a long journey, but with prayer and God's help, they'll recover from this.
Exactly. And we know that God can bring restoration. And we really feel, even my daughters, they'll be 19 next month. And both of them are, we've all, walked through this together, and we all feel that God is going to use these experiences that we've walked through to be able to help other people.
Amen. Amen. And we appreciate you doing that. Let's dive into what I wanted to talk to you about today, and I'd like to do so in chunks over our conversation. So let's start with the basics. Colorado just passed a controversial new law, HB 1312, also known as the Kelly Loving Act, which on the surface claims to be a civil rights measure. But you and others have sounded the alarm. So what exactly does this law do, and why should parents across America be concerned?
Yeah, this is one of the most radical LGBTQ pro-trans pieces of legislation that I've seen, which the concern there is that these policies it won't just stay in Colorado, right? So the pieces of this particular bill that aren't yet adopted in other blue states will probably become legislation very soon. But what this bill does is it requires schools, it requires everybody to, you got to call a child by their preferred name and their preferred pronouns and allow them to dress however they want. There, and there's punishments for people who don't. They're calling it a, discrimination. If you, I think the bill even has in the text dead naming. If you dead name, that is considered discrimination. And this is a very slippery slope. Think about being a teacher or, a parent. You've named your child something. You've been calling your child that name since birth, and suddenly they're 13 years old and decide they're going to change their name. Even if you are trying as best you can to go along with this law because you want to protect your rights as a parent or an educator or whatever you happen to be, you're going to slip up from time to time. And where, is there going to be a leftist activist just waiting for that to happen? I think what we're going to see as this plays out, we're going to see in the school system, teachers coming under fire, potentially teachers losing their job, making way for more activist teachers to be hired. But even more critically, I think we're going to see this weaponized against parents. You're going to see it in the court system, in the family court system. Think about in custody battles, how this could be used against a parent who is, maybe not going to do this so-called gender affirming by calling their son a girl's name. I think this is a very slippery slope. I think we're going to see it abused greatly in the family court system. And you're going to have parents who aren't allowed to see their children as a result of their beliefs about what they're calling gender affirming care.
So you've mentioned, what's one of the most troubling aspects of the law, and it's how it redefines coercive control in custody battles. So even treating misgendering or dead naming, I guess as they call it, as potential forms of abuse. So could you explain how this could be weaponized against parents who don't affirm gender ideology?
Yeah, I think that you will see child protective services coming in. Like, let's say, for example, just to kind of make a potential everyday example that we could see here. Your child goes to school and happens to say to a teacher or a counselor or some staff at the school that, my parents are dead naming me. And so for people watching that maybe don't know what dead naming is, that's the name that the given name of the child. So they go to school and they tell somebody that they're being dead named by their parents, and that school official could contact and would contact child protective services and let them know that this child is being abused by their parents, by the parents not going along with the child's chosen name and chosen identity. And then you're going to have child protective services on the doorstep of this family and taking the child away. In Washington, we have seen this a number of times. And it happens very regularly. I think people don't speak out about it because there's an element of shame to it, or they don't want retaliation from the government. But I think in places like Colorado that are adopting these laws, you're going to see a lot more weaponization from the government against parental rights. And you're going to see kids taken from their parents who will not go along with the gender affirming narrative, that the left is playing. And, the coercive control law, Washington passed one in 2022. Several states, California, New York, Hawaii, have passed coercive control laws just in the last 5 years. So this is something that is new, and they kind of bury it under like domestic violence laws, but in the text of those bills, if a parent, didn't give their child screen time or didn't allow their child to participate in an extracurricular activity, this could be considered coercive control under these laws. Well, as parents, aren't those ways that we discipline our children? We withhold privileges. It is a privilege to have an iPad or to play on the basketball team. But now the government is going to say if parents are doing this, this is considered coercive control. Therefore, they're being abusive to their children. I mean, this is very scary, and we're going to see it happening more and more. It's going to become commonplace.
That is outlandish. I just can't even believe what I'm hearing. So, and it's the first time I've heard dead naming. I mean, I guess you could tell that by the way I said it. Um, and isn't it shameful that that's what they're calling the given name? I mean, you can almost see the evil in that, right? Because it's like they're dead to that person. It's just the epitome of evil. So I'm so glad that you're speaking out about this, and your organization is making parents aware and looking out for this type of legislation in their state and preventing it, because we know typically it starts in states like Washington or California, and then it progresses, like you've suggested, across the country. So that's the value of the work that you're doing and speaking out and sharing, because you're not even a parent in Colorado. You live in Florida, but of course your organization is national and you're keeping an eye on these things. And I'm just so grateful for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So we need to take a short break, but when we come back, I'd like to ask you about how this bill bars Colorado courts from honoring out-of-state rulings that restrict gender transitions for minors. Don't go away. I'll be right back with my interview with Julie Barrett right after this. A California school district suspended 2 children for 5 days because they quote-unquote misgendered a biological male dressed like a girl by calling him he. A Tennessee student received a 3-day suspension for online satirical memes he posted mocking his principal. A New Hampshire teenager is suing his school district after he was suspended from athletics for saying there are only 2 genders. A North Carolina high school student was suspended for 3 days simply for using the term illegal alien. Schools across the country are limiting students' free speech, teaching them by example that free speech no longer exists in America. U.S. Parents Involved in Education's mission is to empower parents to resist the government school's Orwellian attack on free speech. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. With me today is Julie Barrett, founder of Conservative Ladies of America, and we're discussing Colorado's controversial new law, HB 1312, also known as the Kelly Loving Act. Julie, this bill also prohibits Colorado courts from honoring rulings from other states that restrict gender transitions for minors. So in effect, the state is inviting children to cross state lines for medical interventions without parents' consent. What does this mean for parental rights nationwide?
This is a really scary trend, I'll call it, that we see happening in several states. I call it transgender trafficking. And like you said, they're inviting it. Colorado is inviting the transgender trafficking. And so let's just say you have a child custody case in Texas. That's where your parenting plan has been, put into place. And the father doesn't want the child, the daughter, to have, top surgery, let's say. But the mom does. And so if the mom takes the child from Texas to Colorado for the so-called gender affirming care, Colorado will protect that child and that mother and all of the providers, anybody involved in this situation and providing these services to the child will be protected by Colorado state law. And so I think what you're going to see start to happen, and we've already seen this, there was something with the Texas Attorney General a couple of years ago, maybe it was just last year, with Seattle Children's Hospital involving a minor child with the so-called gender affirming care. You're going to see a lot of states battling each other with these laws that conflict, because what we've seen in red states to protect children from these interventions, the blue states are allowing it to flourish, and they're inviting this transgender trafficking. And so you're going to see a lot of legal issues within the attorney generals from one state and the attorney general of another state. And I think it's very scary. I think this also invites people who are not family members. You have, LGBTQ activists who serve to take these kids from homes that do not go along with their gender or sexual identity, and they will then be able to take these kids from one state to another to get these services, and they'll be protected in a state like Colorado. So this is very scary. This is child abuse. We have minor children that are being really coerced by these activists, this LGBTQ activists, to have these irreversible procedures and medications, and they're not old enough to make these decisions. So, in short, to answer your question, I think we're going to see a lot of legal issues going on interstate that's going to cost taxpayers a lot of money, and worst of all, is going to hurt a lot of children in the process.
I agree with you that it's child abuse. It is absolutely despicable. I've done a lot of research on even what the hormones do to children that are permanent damage, stunning their growth and other things. So I just wanted to interject. I'm not sure if you saw, I saw a news headline earlier today that the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Tennessee law that I believe prohibits minor transition surgery. So that's a big victory for our country. I just wanted to throw that in. Not sure if you saw that. I haven't even read the details. I just read the headline today.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that because I think about an hour before you and I jumped on here, the SCOTUS ruling came out in favor of Tennessee being able to uphold their ban on so-called gender-affirming care for minor children. It's a huge win because this really sets a precedent.
Amen. Amen. And we need more rulings like that, and we need, organizations like yours that are putting a spotlight on these things that are happening all around the country. So together, with God's help again, we can continue to battle this. I know it's going to be a long battle, and you've laid that out, and it's just permeated the culture to a point where it's everywhere. And so it's really a wonderful thing to have that bit of a victory today. So let's talk a little bit about schools, because we know schools are also affected by the Colorado law that mandates gender-neutral dress codes and requires school staff to honor chosen names and pronouns for any reason, including gender identity. So how does this change the role of teachers and administrators, and what might it mean for students who disagree?
Yeah, I think we have really seen the schools turn into the public schools, I should clarify, turn into indoctrination centers. In some states, the teachers have to undergo training, DEI training or whatever you want to call it, that really kind of indoctrinates the teachers so that they are able to indoctrinate the kids. But with, this really, I think the Colorado law, as far as education is concerned, really pushes things to the next level because it requires all of the staff and everybody involved at the school to allow a child to go by, whatever name they want, call themselves whatever gender, dress however they want, and of course use whichever restroom they want. And from what I could gather in the text of the bill, there's nothing that prohibits or it allows children who want to dress up as animals or non-humans to also be able to do that, and teachers, staff cannot discriminate against whatever they choose to identify with. We hear the furries, right? The kids wearing cat costumes at schools, and some talk about students using litter boxes and things like that. And these particular bills protect that. And I think what we're going to see is you're going to have teachers who don't agree with these kinds of policies and don't want to be forced into going along with something that goes very much against their core values and beliefs. And they're going to leave education. I mean, we're already seeing, an exodus of teachers, and you're going to see those spots filled with a new version of activist teachers. So it's a very slippery slope. I also think the biggest issue here is the children, allowing children to play, to believe that they can just identify as whatever they want to. We're lying to children, and we're creating a very dysfunctional generation of Americans, and that is the biggest concern here, I think.
Well, I agree. And so that's when it's really going over the top when you talk about identifying as animals and all of that. I've heard talk of that. And it's so over the top to think that, people in their right mind, adults in their right mind, think that this is okay and are advocating for it and defending it. It's just really hard to understand, isn't it?
Yeah, and you look at the scores coming out, across the country from the education system, and our students can't read, they can't write, they can't do math, so they're not being educated, and this is such a huge disservice to our students.
To our students and the taxpayers of America that are paying for this garbage. It's just unbelievable. And that's why I try to encourage all freedom-loving Americans, I call them, to get involved with this issue and understand that because we spend a ton of money on government schools, and to think that this is the product that we're receiving for our investment is just, like I said, it's just over the top. So let's talk about the bigger picture. The law doesn't just affect Colorado. It could serve as a blueprint for other states. So what do you see happening next, and how should parents and educators prepare?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is a blueprint for other states. There are other states that have, pieces of this type of legislation, but I think you will see other states take up the pieces that they lack, such as California and Washington, of this bill. So I think you will see it spread. I say legislation is like a web. It's always connected to other things. So, we've touched on how this impacts the family and the education system, and it's medical too. So it's not just a single focused issue. It encompasses so many different aspects, especially in other states. So, you're going to continue to see red states like, we talked about Tennessee and the SCOTUS win there. You're going to continue to see red states passing policies to protect children and to protect families and parental rights and the rights of children. And you're going to see blue states continue to go to the left. And that's why it's really critical that we, the people, the freedom-loving Americans, the common sense citizens, are willing to step up and speak up and put some skin in the game. I know that it can be difficult to speak up, especially in a deep blue state, but we must do it. We are the only hope our children have for the future. And if we are not courageous enough to speak up and put some skin in the game, which might mean attending a school board meeting or a city council meeting or speaking in front of your state legislature in opposition to radical policies like this, we have to do this. We have to get off of social media, and we have to actually get in the game.
Amen. I agree with that. Get out from behind the keyboards and get active. I agree.
Yes. Amen.
So we need to take another short break, but when we come back, I'd like to talk to you about I'd like to ask you the two questions that I ask all my guests before closing the show. So don't go away. I'll be right back with my interview with Julie Barrett right after this. A Michigan high school recently approved an expressly pro-Hamas position for a student debate while turning down the option to present a pro-Israel perspective, in effect endorsing arguments in defense of an international terrorist group. A New York City elementary school engaged in Jewish erasure when a classroom map of the Middle East identified all countries except Israel, which was labeled Palestine. Incidents like these illustrate how the indoctrination of impressionable minds leads to anarchy, evidenced by an increase in anti-Semitic activity on college campuses by students who have been radicalized. U.S. Parents Involved in Education believes that the next generation must be rescued by restoring education to its local roots, controlled by parents. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspi.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. With me today is Julie Barrett, founder of Conservative Ladies of America. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been an important conversation. But before we close, I'd like to ask you 2 questions I ask all my guests. So, what is your biggest concern right now, and what gives you hope?
My biggest concern right now, I think, is this topic that we're discussing today, and the government interference on the families, whether it is compelled speech or, compelling, forcing parents to lie to their children about their gender or sexual identity. Really, that I believe is the biggest issue, because if we lose this generation of children, we lose our country. And there is a Marxist agenda to take our children and to dominate our children, their minds and their behaviors. So that's my biggest concern. My greatest hope is, conversations like you and I are having today are waking up people every day. So at least, even if one person watching this interview decides to attend a school board meeting or homeschool their child or testify on a piece of legislation, to me, that's a win. And so every time people like us speak up, we're waking up other people. And so that's my hope, is that people are starting to wake up. It's maybe not as fast as I would like, but it's happening. And so, with God, I know that all things are possible, and we know that He has the victory in the end. And so, that's my hope. People keep waking up, and Jesus has the victory.
Amen. Amen. See, I'm just going to touch on one thing that you said. You talked about, and we didn't talk about this previously, is that in a lot of instances, schools are encouraging their children to lie to their parents. So they're doing all of this transitioning, providing medical and psychological help to, quote unquote, help to children. We'll call it something else, treatments, I guess, behind the parents' backs. So that's another really dreadful part of this. And in so many ways, it's not isolated in the gender transition arena, but in so many ways, the government schools are creating a wedge between the parent and the child. And I think it is an intentional agenda. You also mentioned, the Marxist agenda. And so that's part of it, is stripping a child's relationship with their parents and all of the values which they've raised them with. So that's another important aspect of this. I actually had an op-ed that was published in Town Hall on Saturday that is about this very issue, in a particular case in Rhode Island where the parent is suing the government. It's a Jane Doe case because she's fearful of being persecuted because she's speaking out. But for 2 years, her middle school daughter was being transitioned behind her back, and she only learned about this when her daughter attempted suicide right in front of her. It's another dreadful story, and I'm sure you can relate. So this is another really big component of all this that parents need to recognize and wake up to, is the fact that there is an intentional agenda, and children are being cut away from their parents in many ways. Okay, so thanks again for coming on the podcast, Julie. This has been awesome. I'd love to have you back maybe later in the year for another episode. I know you have a lot of issues on your website that we could dive into. So let's think about having you back again. And thank you for helping us unpack the reality behind this law and the wake-up call for parents and educators and anyone concerned about the erosion of rights and our freedoms in our schools and court systems. So tell our listeners and our viewers how they can learn more about Conservative Ladies of America.
Well, Sherry, thank you so much for inviting me to be your guest today. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I would love to come back later in the year and discuss a different topic. People can learn more about Conservative Ladies of America and how they can get involved with what we're doing by visiting conservativeladiesofamerica.com. That's our website. They can go sign up for our newsletter. They can also find us on Substack and all social media platforms, just Conservative Ladies of America. That's what we are on all platforms. And we do a weekly Zoom meeting on Thursdays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And it is just a citizen gathering. It's a place for citizens to network and figure out how they can plug in to their community. So it's for citizens all across the country. And that's also the information to join that Zoom is on our website as well.
Okay, great. Lots of good resources for everyone. So thank you again, Julie, and thank you to our viewers for supporting our work. And join me again next week for another episode of Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, U.S. PIE seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional U.S. PIE chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapters section.